For a long time, handheld gaming was something that was restricted to the world of 2D. If you wanted something three-dimensional that took advantage of the latest technology, you stayed home and played on console or PC. If you wanted to game on something tiny that you could take with you, well, you settled for something in 2 dimensions. But in the early to mid-2000s, that started to change, with the likes of the failed Nokia N-Gage in 2003, the extremely successful Nintendo DS in 2004, and the Sony PSP, which launched in Japan in late 2004 and in North America and several other regions in early 2005. Of the 3 handhelds, the PSP was the most technically impressive, with graphics that, at times, looked like its current-gen console counterpart, the PS2. To top things off, it could play music and videos as well, and was even later updated to have an internet browser and digital download store. If you were a gamer, or even just a consumer of media at the time, this was an extremely enticing device. And until the release of the iPhone in 2007, it was arguably the #1 all-around device for on-the-go entertainment. Still, video and other nifty features aside, the primary purpose of the PSP was, of course, gaming. And the system was certainly no slouch in that department when it released in North America on March 24th, 2005. Launching with a quite large lineup of 23 games. Not nearly as huge as the PS2's massive 29 game launch, but pretty big nonetheless. Well, how did these games perform? Was it worth getting the system on launch day? Let's find out by looking at all 23 of them. To make things easy, let's go in alphabetical order, with a few exceptions that I'll explain later. Starting things off is Ape Escape on the Loose. This game is a full-blown remake of the first Ape Escape, a game in which you travel through time capturing various escaped apes who are running rampant in each time period. It's a classic. This version of the game features some notable updates. These include the graphics, the soundtrack, and the controls. The controls might be the biggest departure from the original, which had you using the PS1's DualShock controller's right analog stick to control the various monkey-catching gadgets. Since the PSP only had the left analog stick for movement, you tap each gadget's assigned button to use it, rather than just select it. If you didn't like the original control scheme, this may just be the ideal version of the game for you. I, however, found it to be much less intuitive and a bit harder to catch the apes with. It's far from bad though. The soundtrack is another area I'm not sure is improved upon. Every song has been redone and sounds slightly different than the originals, also being what I'd say sounds slightly worse. The same goes for the sound effects. Here's catching an ape in the original.
Hi-ya! Gotcha! Yes!
And here's On the Loose.
Gotcha!
I honestly prefer the original. Still, that could simply be a matter of personal taste. The graphics, however, are inarguably much better and a huge improvement. Ape Escape is one of the best 3D platformers of the 90s and is well worth playing any version of. If you're going to play the game now, I'd recommend playing the PS4 version as opposed to this. However, had you been an Ape Escape fan back in 2005, playing this version of the game on the go was certainly fun. ATV Off-Road Fury, Blazin' Trails. Remember these games? There were like a million of them. In fact, the series still exists under the MX vs ATV title. Well, this was its first non-PS2 entry, being somewhat of a port of Off-Road Fury 3. The game definitely feels of its time, with a soundtrack and presentation that screams 2005. Also, what's with the pumpkin-headed guy that closes out the game's intro? I guess it must be the series' mascot or something? Speaking of the soundtrack, it features the song Duality by Slipknot, which had a music video I happened to be present at the filming of. See that kid in the Darth Maul shirt? That's me. Moving on. One thing I found kind of surprising, the cancel button in this game is triangle as opposed to circle. I thought by the release of the PSP was when Sony had set in stone that circle is cancel for its Western releases, but I guess that wasn't quite the case until the PS3. Anyway, onto the gameplay. Unlike a lot of more traditional racers, you're constantly flying over bumps and hills, during which time you can perform stunts to earn points. Of course, you gotta be careful when doing so. There are two types of courses, more closed-off arena stages, which are similar to what you'd see in other racers, and, in keeping with the game's name, more open-ended off-road sections. The off-road sections take Rockstar's approach to racing, having you race from checkpoint to checkpoint in whatever manner you choose. These tracks seem to be less forgiving and probably take a bit more strategy and practice to win. This game is actually pretty fun. The fast speed, combined with the constant hills and obstacles, definitely makes it an engaging experience. It would be nice if there were more than 4 racers, but that's probably a limitation of the system, and it's implemented in a way that doesn't really make it seem like such a big deal. Had you managed to round up 3 friends who had this game, I imagine it would have been fun to play the game's ad hoc multiplayer. Blazing Trails would have been a decent pickup for racing game fans at the PSP's launch. Moving on, we get to Darkstalkers Chronicle: The Chaos Tower. This is a mashup of all 3 games in Capcom's Darkstalkers one-on-one fighting series, letting you choose the characters and levels from all 3, as well as which gameplay style you prefer. For example, if you choose Darkstalkers 1's style, you get the typical first to win 2 rounds combat you'd expect from a fighting game, while Darkstalkers 3 gives you a slightly different variation where the battle continues until one character's health is completely drained. As this is a port of a 90s arcade series, you are given various aspect ratio options. For some reason, the default option is to stretch the screen out to 16:9, but only some sort of maniac would leave it like that. Aside from an arcade mode, the game also gives you tower mode, in which you gradually climb said tower one fight at a time, while alternating between 3 characters of your choice. You may be given various penalties in a round, such as not being allowed to punch or kick. Each time you clear a round, you unlock various artwork from the games, which can be viewed in a gallery. I found this mode to be pretty enjoyable. If you haven't played this series before, you may still recognize quite a few of the characters from the Marvel vs. Capcom series, which was actually the case for me, as this was my first time playing a Darkstalkers game. The characters are all based in horror and fantasy, which I honestly think is an awesome theme to go with, and gives it a very unique feel compared to the other Capcom fighters I've played. In fact, the deadly weapon-wielding Little Red Bonnie Hood might just be my new favorite fighting game character. One more thing, this is yet another game where triangle is cancel. This is a fairly enjoyable fighting game, which would have been good for fans of the genre when the PSP came out, as this was the only launch game in the genre. Still, this definitely isn't the ideal way to play these games now. In fact, Chaos Tower is basically impossible to emulate properly, so if you want to play it, you'll need an actual PSP, a PS Vita, or a PS TV. If you do have one of those though, you might want to give it a try. Next is Dynasty Warriors. I'm sure you know the never-ending historical China-based beat-em-up series and its numerous Musou counterparts. Well, this was the first portable entry in the series, surprisingly predating the GBA's Dynasty Warriors Advance by a year. Funny enough, this wasn't the first Musou game to launch with a Sony system, nor would it be the last. Now, don't let the name fool you, this is very much a new entry in the series, and actually plays a bit different from its PS2 predecessors. While it does have the same general gameplay of fighting through hordes of soldiers to gain ground in a larger map, how you make your way through its levels has been changed. Instead of going around one large battlefield, this game has you battling it out in one small section at a time. After claiming one area, you move to a menu where you select the next spot you'd like to enter. There's a bit of strategy involved, as certain sections can bring benefits such as completely recovering you and your allies' health. One thing that could be seen as an issue, the screen in battle is very cluttered, with maybe a bit too much information being shown at all times. I'm guessing this, as well as the way the levels are structured, could be a way to cut down on the amount of graphics being rendered, though even what's shown is pretty bogged down compared to its PS2 counterparts. In fact, the overall presentation is bogged down, with no voice acting outside of the screams of battle, or cutscenes of any kind aside from the opening FMV. Being that this was one of the earliest games released for the PSP, I don't think developers had quite yet figured out how to handle large 3D environments on the system. That said, this gameplay actually works fairly well for a portable version of Dynasty Warriors, letting you play for a bit at a time, even being able to save your progress when in the overview map. So some of these compromises may have been for the best. Now, I guess I better bring up that this game was often criticized upon its release for having very long load times between each section of the map, something that was actually an issue for a lot of PSP games before the advent of downloadable titles or the later, faster to load PSP 2000 and 3000 models. The same could be said for a lot of the games on this list actually, but as this was the one I remembered hearing the biggest fuss over at launch, I thought I'd mention it now. While this may have been acceptable for someone looking for a portable Musou experience in 2005, those looking to specifically play a PSP game in the series now would likely be better off playing Warriors Orochi 1 or 2, which have gameplay that more closely mirrors what was being done on consoles. And now, Lumines Puzzle Fusion. No, not Lumines, as I incorrectly thought for years. Lumines is widely considered to be the best PSP launch game. Is it? Let's take a look. Lumines is a puzzle game in the vein of Tetris or Puyo Puyo, with the goal of making squares of the same color that are erased by a line that crosses the screen at a speed that matches the beat of the music. As you progress, the music, background, and design of the blocks changes, as does the difficulty. It is simple, yes, but incredibly fun and addictive. It has a great soundtrack too, as a game this focused on music should. There are some additional modes as well, such as a time attack mode or competitive 2-player. There's not a lot to add really, other than this is a very cool game that is well worth checking out. Well, one last thing that I guess may be worth mentioning, this game was a Japanese developed title that was published by Ubisoft. From the late 90s to mid-2000s, they actually put out quite a lot of Japanese titles, such as Grandia 2 and Ape Escape 2. This seems to be one of the last titles they put out before apparently exiting the import game. So, is this the best game of the PSP's launch? Well, we're not finished yet, but in all honesty, I'm gonna have to agree with the general sentiment. This is a great game that really matches the sleek, cool image that the PSP set out to make. Okay, here's the part where we get to the dreaded M/N section. You know the one, when you're at a game store and you're looking for something like, say, Maximo vs. the Army of Zin or Neo Contra, only to run into an ocean of Madden games, NBA games, NHL games, you get the gist. Well, the PSP had 8 sports games at launch, one of which you may have noticed I've already skipped over. So, instead of making you suffer through detailed sports game reviews throughout the video, and for my own sanity, I've decided to quickly knock them all down in a more abbreviated fashion than the other segments, in what I call the Sports Game Bonanza. Without further ado, let's get this thing rolling, starting with the one I left out earlier. You like hockey? Gretzky NHL has you covered. It's about what you'd expect from a hockey game. Hitting pucks, constantly looking at the color white, all that stuff. I couldn't figure out if you could get into fights though. Actually, I might as well bring this up now. None of the sports games that launched with the PSP have the year they came out in the title. This isn't Gretzky NHL 05 as it was known on PS2. Nope, just Gretzky NHL. I wonder if this is because all of these came out in March, whereas a year's sports games normally would have come out in the fall of the previous year, which is when the PS2 game the sport is based on was released. Something that makes me think this was indeed the case is the fact that Gretzky NHL 06 did in fact come out for the PSP with a year intact in the title in October of 05. Anyway, moving on. MLB. Not MLB the show, just MLB. Actually, this was the last Sony published MLB game before their The Show series. This game definitely looks nice, with the player uniforms even getting dirty after slides. I didn't have too much trouble hitting the balls, but once I took over as the pitcher, I had no idea what I was doing.
Pitch too high, and that's over the catcher's head.
And now another baseball game, but this one's more important because it's MVP Baseball. If you thought the players in MLB were valuable, well, you better shut up and sit down. Okay, seriously though, this one is in a lot of ways very similar to MLB. It even has the same teams. The graphics aren't as good though. I had a much harder time hitting the ball in this one, as the timing seems to be completely different than the previous game. Maybe that's what I get for immediately playing them back to back, but I don't know. This game did get slightly worse reviews than MLB.
He didn't waste any time. He went right after it. Gets him on 3 straight strikes.
NBA. This is another fairly average game of its type, this time being, of course, basketball. One thing I found to be a bit of a problem is that it's kind of hard to tell where exactly the ball is when not in your possession, which made it a bit difficult to position my players in the correct spot where I could get it. Considering the game revolves entirely around said ball, that's a bit of a problem. In comparison, the PS1 launched with NBA Jam Tournament Edition, in which your ball has a clear shadow, completely eliminating any confusion as to where it is. Despite being nearly 10 years old at the time of this game's release, it's a much better game. Play that instead. Next comes NBA Street Showdown. This is a portable version of the NBA Street series, which took a much more arcadey and cartoonish approach to the genre, making it feel a lot like the previously mentioned NBA Jam. And that's a good thing. This is a much better basketball game than the previous one. It's easier to tell what's going on in this one, as the camera zooms in a lot more. Most importantly, there's no guessing where the ball is, as it is much more defined. Making baskets also has a pretty satisfying feel. Unless you were dead set on getting a more realistic basketball game, this would have been the one to get. Here comes another game in the Street series with NFL Street 2 Unleashed. This game is definitely more complicated than NBA Street. Even after going through the tutorial, I found myself getting lost during a lot of the gameplay. I've actually been accused of pretending I don't know about sports on my PS2 launch games episode, but, you know, maybe people who don't watch football, myself included, aren't going to completely understand what's going on here or what these symbols mean. Still, as with the previous game, this one does have a fun vibe to it. Both games were published under EA's EA Big Label, the same publisher as the once extremely popular and well-received SSX series, which itself later got a PSP version with SSX On Tour. With their over-the-top presentation and features like in-game music players, their games feel like a somewhat better fit for handheld gaming than more traditional sports titles. Tiger Woods PGA Tour. This one's definitely a change of pace from the previous games. In fact, its relaxing, easygoing nature led me to play it far longer than any of these other sports games. It's pretty easy to figure out. In fact, it gives you the recommended club on your turn, though you'll have better results if you make a few adjustments. This game lets you create your own golfer, which includes choosing the gender. This and NBA Street are actually the only two PSP launched sports games to let you play as a female player. Anyway, as far as golf games go, this one is fine.
Nice for Blanc. Nice birdie. Really birdie, birdie, birdie.
Open wide for some soccer!
Here comes World Tour Soccer. This one is the fourth Sony published sports game we'll be looking at, making them responsible for half of the total games in this segment. This one has you playing from left to right, like a basketball game, which is a bit jarring to me as the last soccer game I played was the Sega Saturn launch game, Worldwide Soccer, where you played from a vertical perspective. But yeah, it's very easy to figure out, with fairly simple controls. I guess if you wanted a soccer game at launch, this would have been okay. And by the way, this is the last PSP launch sports game, so finally we can move on. Let us never speak of this genre again.
Boring!
Metal Gear Acid. This was hands down the game I was most hyped for when the PSP came out. I mean, imagine seeing this new next level handheld in the gaming magazines accompanied with this screenshot of Solid Snake shooting a machine gun. The idea seemed amazing. A 3D Metal Gear on the go? Sign me up. Well, it wasn't quite what I initially expected. That game wouldn't exist for another few years. This game is a turn-based strategic stealth game that mixes in a card game system that determines what abilities you can use during your turns. Definitely not your typical Metal Gear, but it's not bad. You form a deck of your choosing from cards you collect in gameplay and through an in-game shop, which can either be used to move a certain distance or perform the action depicted on the card. This can range from simply using a weapon to getting a benefit such as invisibility. Eventually, Snake teams up with another character, with you having to alternate between both to strategically make your way through the game's levels. It may take a bit of time to get used to, but once you get down the game's system, making your way through an area without being seen is extremely satisfying, especially if you can do it without having to attack an enemy. Although the story is not canon in the Metal Gear universe, it is just as plot-heavy as a typical game in the series, with all the usual twists and turns that the mainline games are known for. What's not typical though, is that these scenes are told via text only. In fact, some scenes straight up feel like a visual novel, with static 2D backgrounds and characters rambling on and on about this or that. It's got some weird psychic puppets that hijack a plane too. While the gameplay and story are not quite on par with a lot of the other games in the series, it's still enjoyable for what it is. If you like Metal Gear, or even just strategy games, Metal Gear Acid is definitely a recommend, even today. Next is Need for Speed Underground Rivals, the second of 4 racing games we'll be looking at. This game takes the popular of the time Need for Speed Underground games and shrinks it down into a handheld experience, and props to the developers because they did a very good job. It is missing a few features from its console big brothers, such as a lack of a story or free roaming mode, but the overall experience is very similar. The awesome licensed soundtrack is there, as are the unlockable cars, customization, and various racing modes. In terms of how the game looks, this might be the most visually appealing PSP launch game outside of Lumines. It is very colorful and just nice to look at. It also has the awesome effect of the screen going blurry when you reach top speed that's always satisfying to see. I also like how you can manually type in your hometown in the driver details menu. Pointless, but cool. Aside from the few downgrades I mentioned before that some may not even notice, this game really did a good job of showing that the PSP was like holding a PS2 in the palm of your hands, at least as far as early titles for the system go, and it definitely would have been a good pickup for fans of the series. If you were worried that the PSP's launch wouldn't have enough games with the word tower in the title, fear not, because Rengoku, the Tower of Purgatory, is the next game on the list. This is a Konami published game in which you play as a strange looking humanoid thing, slowly making your way up a tower one floor at a time, all while fighting similar looking humanoid things. You pick up new weapons and equipment, along with points you use to level up various stats. You can even equip a gun to your face, kinda like MDK. You need to be careful in this game, because if you die, you lose the items you have equipped, giving it a bit of a Souls vibe. Though if you go back to the spot where you previously died, your items are no longer there. This is definitely the brownest game of the PSP's launch. If you wanted to get something to show off the visuals of the system, picking this game up would be a mistake. In fact, the gameplay is just as bland, with repetitive and clunky combat. One little oddity, this game has you using the D-pad to move while the analog stick controls the camera. And there's no way to change this as far as I could tell. Rengoku is really only notable for being the only game from the PSP's launch other than Metal Gear Acid to have an M rating. Both Konami games, oddly. That said, this may just be the worst game of the lineup, so yeah, you would have been better off avoiding this one, at the time of release and now.
Ridge Racer!
Yes, Ridge Racer, but no, not that Ridge Racer. Or that Ridge Racer. This game is a collection of tracks and cars from previous entries in the series, making it a must-play for fans. This entry has the addition of a nitro boost, which builds upon performing drifts. The more you drift, the more speed boosts you get. Using one of these to get the upper hand on your rival drivers is a great feeling. In fact, the gameplay as a whole is as intense and fun as ever. As with the original, this game starts with a playable Namco arcade game during the initial loading screen, that game being Rally X. It doesn't end there though. Rally X is intertwined with the actual gameplay, being the basis for the indicators shown when going through checkpoints. You can also play the game from the options menu, which is a step up from having to restart the game like you did in 1995. Graphically speaking, this is another great showcase of what the PSP could do, though it's not nearly as colorful as its fellow launch racing game, Need for Speed. In fact, even compared to the original game on PS1, the colors can be a bit dull, but it more than makes up for that in the amount of detail on screen during the races. The tracks always have a lot going on and are fun to observe. And, admittedly, the dull colors can be attributed to the variety of weather the game has, as some levels are definitely more vibrant than others. I guess they can't all be sunsets and sunny days. Even more than the previously mentioned Dynasty Warriors, Ridge Racer has a long history of launching with Sony systems, with a streak that wasn't broken until the release of the PS4. In fact, as of the recording of this video, the series has been somewhat of a no-show for quite a while, which is a real shame. Like arcade racers? Give this one a try. It's a definite recommend to fans of the genre, and would have been a great first game to get with your new PSP. Moving on, we get to Smart Bomb, a game that may make you think of Tomb Raider, not because of its theme or gameplay, but the fact that it was developed by Core Design and published by Eidos. Smart Bomb is a puzzle game in which you must complete various timed challenges in order to defuse a bomb. Some of these challenges include lining up wires, redirecting lasers, or a simple game of Simon. You can do these in a story mode, in which you must complete a preset list of challenges without fail in an order of your choosing, or in arcade mode, which randomly gives you new challenges until you inevitably fail. If you've played WarioWare, that mode has a similar vibe. I honestly think defusing bombs is a very good premise for a puzzle game, and there are times when this premise works very well. The game definitely can feel intense. However, I couldn't help but feel some of these challenges weren't exactly fun or even easy to understand. In the story mode, I could never get past the second laser challenge, and in the arcade mode, there was this one. Yeah, I just didn't get it. Still, I imagine with time, someone would be able to master all the challenges and have a great time trying to get a high score. Not as good as Lumines or WarioWare, but it's worth at least checking out if the concept intrigues you. And now we get to Spider-Man 2. You may be familiar with the very well-regarded console version of Spider-Man 2, which was the first game to take the character into an open-world setting. Well, this is not that. In fact, it shares much more in common with the console adaptation of the first Spider-Man movie, even going as far as to share some locations from that game. This game has you playing through one level at a time, with some being based on the movie, and some not. One level may have you beating up bad guys, while another could have you rescuing civilians. The combat is not great. As far as I could tell, there's no major strategy you can incorporate into these fights. Just keep punching and kicking an enemy until their health bar is empty. It does give you a Spidey sense you can use to avoid danger, but it only alerts you to some danger. A lot of the time, you'll end up getting punched and shot with no warning. The game also has some pretty bad camera work. There's no button you can tap to quickly reset your view. Instead, you need to use the D-pad to move the camera around. After each level, you can upgrade various abilities with points you get based on your performance. But man, do you get these points fast, making it seem almost too easy. I only played a handful of levels and already had my health upgraded by a pretty huge amount. I guess I will say that the visuals are at least pretty good. In game at least. The pre-rendered scenes featuring recreations of Tobey Maguire, James Franco, and the other cast members from the movie are laughably bad. Actually, that may be worth seeing if you get a kick out of that sort of thing. Launch PSPs actually came packaged with a UMD of the movie Spider-Man 2. This game is okay, I suppose, but you would have been better off just watching that and getting a different game instead. Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix. Okay, skateboarding may be a sport, but it's
Extreme.
so I decided to make an exception for this one and leave it out of the sports segment. Similar to Need for Speed, this is a modified port of a console game. However, it's not quite as well put together as that one. A lot of the features from Tony Hawk's Underground 2 are here, such as the Create a Skater mode, which is actually one of the best character creation tools from its time. You can make your skater as normal or as crazy as you'd like. As with Need for Speed, you can enter your hometown as well. I'll make my skeleton from Cleveland. I couldn't find the option to choose their voice though, probably a storage constraint. Actually, that brings me to another thing. The game does in fact have the story mode that's present in the console version. It's a fairly lighthearted and fun story about an underground skating tournament featuring the likes of Bam Margera and Wee Man, making it feel almost like a Jackass game. Though something is kinda off about the character models in the cutscenes in this version. Maybe it's the emulation, but their eyes keep bugging out. What the fuck? Here's the console version for comparison's sake. The levels are changed up though, with the first level being a beach setting as opposed to the downtown stage you start off with in the console version, hence the remix subtitle. Another remix, this time being unintentional, is how ugly this game is compared to its console counterpart. There are blocky textures and pop-ins abound. The controls are worse as well. As with Rengoku, you have no option but to use the D-pad to move, making it feel very awkward. I guess it doesn't take too long to get used to, but why were the developers so set on that control scheme that they decided not to give you the option to change it? Tony Hawk's Underground 2 is a great game that skateboarding fans are likely to enjoy. Just not this version. Next up is Twisted Metal Head On. If you've ever played a Twisted Metal game, you know exactly what to expect from this one. Non-stop vehicular combat at its finest. Head On is a direct sequel to Twisted Metal 2, ignoring any other follow-ups, including the much darker Twisted Metal Black. As with the other games in the series, it sees you entering a car combat tournament with a vehicle of your choosing, with the choices including some fan favorites such as Sweet Tooth. As with most other games in the series, each driver has their own unique ending in which the tournament's creator, Calypso, grants them whatever wish they'd like, often with some degree of irony. This entry lets you pick up upgrades from the vehicles you defeat, which you can keep until your vehicle is destroyed. It also has some very fun to use weapons, which each have their own pros and cons and can work a bit differently from each other. Every vehicle also has its own exclusive special attack. Now, the controls may take a bit of time to get used to, as they are very sensitive and unlike most other driving games. But once you do master them, the game is an absolute blast to play. Out of the PSP launch games, I had Ape Escape, Metal Gear Acid, and this. This is probably the one I spent the most time playing, and after playing it again, I can say it holds up very well. It is definitely one of the best entries in the Twisted Metal series, and is still worth playing today. Though, if you do end up giving it a try, you might want to check out the updated PS2 version, which has a ton of new special features including scrapped live-action cutscenes from the first game, and a playable beta version of the cancelled Twisted Metal Black sequel. Untold Legends: Brotherhood of the Blade. This is a hack-and-slash dungeon-crawling RPG published by Sony, and is the first entry in its respective series. The first thing you may notice when playing this game, it feels about a generation behind in terms of presentation, with a scrolling text intro and very cheesy MIDI music. There is also a somewhat lackluster character customization screen that barely gives you any options to pick from. But once the game begins, it's not half bad. The gameplay revolves around going through enemy-infested dungeons, all while defeating everything, picking up new equipment, and learning new skills along the way. It also allows for a co-op multiplayer with up to 4 other players. If you've ever played Baldur's Gate, Dark Alliance, or Champions of Noroth, this game feels incredibly similar, from the way its menus look, to how the items and leveling up work, to the combat and overall gameplay. Considering Champions was also a first-party Sony series, I wonder if this was at one point supposed to be related to that. This game begs for more buttons. A lot of the controls, such as blocking or moving the camera, involve combination presses with the R button. Therefore, the downloadable PSN version on PS Vita or PS TV may be the ideal way to play it. I was a big fan of the Champions series back when the PSP came out, and always wanted to give this a try due to its obvious similarities, but never did. I now kinda wish I'd gotten it back in the day. It's not nearly as good as the games it's imitating, but as a portable equivalent of those games, it does a perfectly fine job. Closing things out, we get to Wipeout Pure. This game takes the fast-paced futuristic racing series that dates back to the dawn of the PS1 and shrinks it down to a handheld experience, and it's done to great effect. In terms of the game's visuals, this may be the best looking PSP launch game. There is so much detail in every track, possibly even more so than Ridge Racer. From birds flying overhead just before you zoom into an underwater tunnel, to the reflections the water in said tunnel creates on the racetrack, it's kind of amazing this came out in a time when the previous generation's handheld racers looked like this. It's not just the visuals that are great either, as the gameplay is top-notch. Unlike the other racers we've looked at, you aren't just worrying about staying ahead of the other vehicles, but also defeating them in combat, as there are various offensive and defensive items spread throughout the tracks that you can use to your advantage, sometimes even destroying your opponent vehicles. And of course, there's just something about making this game's sharp turns and zooming around the tracks that just feels so good. Also, I'd be remiss not to mention this game's soundtrack, which is excellent. Well, at least if you like electronic music, which I very much do. I will admit, I wasn't a big fan of the original Wipeout when I went back to it when researching potential games for my PS1 Top 7 Games episode for 1995, as I felt you lost so much momentum every time you bumped into a wall. However, this has made me think I may need to reevaluate it, as Pure is such a good game. This is another heavy contender for the best game of the PSP's launch. It looks great, it plays great, it's just an awesome game. Anyone who got this with their PSP back in 2005 would have likely been very happy with their purchase. Well, that's the last of the PSP launch games. For no other reason than I find it interesting, let's do a quick tally of what buttons were used to cancel in these games. 20 games used triangle, and only 2 actually used a circle. This is despite the fact that the PSP was made with system menus that use circle as its back button. Oh, and one game went with the Japanese control scheme of having circle be confirm and X be cancel. I'm looking at you, Metal Gear Acid. Still, which buttons are used to confirm or cancel have nothing to do with quality. If I had to narrow it down to 5 of these games that I'd recommend today, I'd go with Lumines, Metal Gear Acid, Ridge Racer, Twisted Metal Head-On, and Wipeout Pure. I better mention now that the list of PSP launched games seems to be inconsistent across multiple sources, with some stating that the thing only launched with 17 games. There are also 2 games, FIFA Soccer and Archer McLean's Mercury, that were listed in several pre-release sources as being part of the launch lineup. However, from what I can tell, they were delayed by a month. The 23 in this video are very likely what launched with the system. This was my 6th launch game video, coming after a bit of a break since the last one. I do plan on making more of these, so feel free to recommend any console you'd like to see covered. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe to see more like it in the future. It would be much appreciated. Fans of the channel may also want to consider supporting it on Patreon for early access footage, a chance to pick games for review, and more. With that said, I think it's about time to finally wrap things up. As always, thanks for watching The Legend of Games.